So I'm Dr. Alex Sexton, and I'm a Leverhulme Early Career Research Fellow at Sheffield University. And I'm a social scientist by background, and I'm going to be talking today about the research that I do on a new and emerging food technology that's come on the scene in recent years. So you might have heard of it by different names. Some people call it cultured meat, which is what I'll be using today. Others refer to it as cultivated meat or clean meat. Franken meat has been a sort of less flattering name for it in the media, but essentially what the technology involves is using stem cell technologies to grow meat outside of the animal body. So one of the methods involved is depicted here at the bottom of this first slide. The first step is to take a small biopsy of cells from a living animal. You then place those cells in a growth medium and put that into a bioreactor where they will multiply and grow and start to form bigger muscle fibers. And then the idea is you can collect up those muscle fibers to make your final product. So to date, it's been possible to make kind of minced meat like products. The kind of end goal really for the industry is to produce bigger cuts of meat, such as steaks and things like that. So I don't have time really to go more into the specifics of the process, but please do put questions in the chat if you have them. But what I'm going to talk through today is really what this technology could offer a place like Sheffield in terms of providing this city, or really any city, an alternative way of sustainably producing animal meat or generally animal proteins. So there are lots of promises of why this process is seen as better for the planet, better for animals, and better for us in terms of health as eaters, compared with conventional animal agriculture. And one of the main promises is that it will likely use a lot less land, and also will be much more flexible in terms of where the facilities will need to be located. So this could mean that a lot of land could be freed up from agriculture for things like rewilding or ecotourism. And it could also mean that facilities could be placed just outside of cities, or even potentially in them. So I've got a very futuristic image here from a cultured meat venture in Japan of how they've kind of imagined what this future and what the facilities could potentially look like. But what will they look like inside? Well, some in the cultured meat industry often draw parallels with beer brewing and say that future factories will effectively be like meat breweries. So I'm not sure what you all sort of think about that, but for some people, thinking of it like this in terms of brewing is a bit less yucky because we're familiar with this process and already kind of accept it as part of our food production. Another possibility could be that there'll be mini production sites inside restaurants. So this is a test kitchen in Israel. So you can sort of see through from where you're sitting, having your meal, you can see through into the back there through the glass, sort of knowing exactly where your meat is coming from. So it kind of plays with this idea of the sort of greater transparency and I guess greater connection and very short food miles from getting them just across the room there. And then another possible future could be that we have our own meat growing appliances in our home. So this is a speculative design project by Alice Turner, who's a student at Central St. Martin's, and she created what she calls the carnery. So this idea that you would have an appliance that would sit alongside your coffee machine and your microwave at home, and you would order your cells using your smartphone, possibly ordering them from local farms or farms in the area. So that doesn't actually exist. That's just a sort of speculative idea. But these are all really just imagined ways of, how we might experience cultured meat in a place like Sheffield or other cities, other parts of the world, and could potentially contribute to sort of feeding urban areas with high volumes of sustainable protein. However, there are still a lot of question marks about how sustainable this technology will be and sort of some of the broader social and economic implications it might bring. So, for example, it might create more urban-based food jobs, But without support for training and reskilling, it's unlikely that current farmers and food producers could easily switch to this approach with the expertise that the technology currently requires, which is mostly sort of cell science and engineering at the moment. So there's important kind of rural versus urban livelihood implications to think about here. The energy footprint of the process is predicted to be very high. So the whole industry needs to be based really on renewable energy to be able to deliver on its environmental promises. So this is a pretty big obstacle for the industry to figure out as things, and particularly as things stand with the energy sector at the moment. The potential to free up lots of land from agriculture could be a huge win environmentally, but again has livelihood implications for agriculture and will need really strong policy protections to make sure that the land isn't changed to something more damaging. Like with any new technology, there are questions about affordability, particularly in the short term, so it probably will be quite expensive as the sort of first products come to market. But also it will be likely very expensive to sort of get involved with as a producer as well, particularly as the technology stands. So that could sort of be a barrier to smaller scale producers. There's also a big question mark as to whether cultured meat will actually replace conventional meat products, or will it simply be another item on the menu and on the sort of supermarket shelf. And we're already seeing with plant-based products that places like Burger King, for example, aren't really seeing people switch from conventional meat burgers to their new plant-based ones, but rather it's just more vegans and vegetarians are actually coming in to their stores. So it's not replacement, it's just additional stuff being produced, which we can't really afford to do for the future of sustainability and sort of tackling what's actually the problem with the food system. And a lot of this technology is already wrapped up in intellectual property, which again poses another barrier for smaller scale ventures to get involved, and could also ultimately lead to further concentration of power and ownership in the global food system. And I think that was something that Martin raised earlier in his presentation. So just to expand on this point with the final slide, bit of a migraine on a slide, but this is a sort of institutional map of what the broader alternative protein sector looked like back in 2020. It is changing literally on a weekly basis, so there's probably out of date bits here, but just to give you a sense of the breakdown of the sector, you've got the kind of startup companies at the top, the institutions supporting the development of those startups, and then at the bottom you've got different kinds of stakeholders funding these ventures. And I just want to sort of draw your attention to the bottom right where it says corporate partners. And this also includes plant-based as well as cultured meat companies. But down at the bottom right-hand corner there, you'll see some of the biggest names in food and drink globally. And it's these companies that have been investing a lot over recent years in both plant-based and cultured meat technologies. And so while some see this as a good thing, because if you get the big players on board, then you're more likely to shift the dial quicker and potentially replace the most intensive systems of animal agriculture around the world, which could have major benefits for the planet, public health, reducing antibiotic usage, etc. But it does also raise important questions about whether big industry buying up these technologies will actually lead to the radical change that we need for the food system. So again, picking up on themes that have already been discussed. And I'll just put this final image up here. This is a depiction of how power is currently distributed within the food system. And with the pinch point in the middle is a handful of multinational companies, like the ones that are investing in cultured meat. And they're controlling the flow between producers at the top of the hourglass and us as customers and eaters at the bottom. And there's been lots of research over decades that has shown how this unequal balance has underpinned many of the major ecological, social and health crises of the modern food system. So this is something that we really need to think about in terms of who is best placed to drive cultured meat innovation, and whether we actually need to be rethinking the broader system and not just kind of reinventing and tinkering with the end product. So again, linking to the kind of big societal questions, particularly about whether cultured meat can be innovated in different ways that fit maybe a more local or agroecological model, for example, or if we actually want cultured meat at all, because this approach doesn't really tackle the culture of overconsumption that we kind of have. So should we instead be trying to get people to produce and eat less meat overall, try and shift our food cultures to whole plant-based foods like lentils and beans and things, or more vegetables? This obviously comes with its own implications and trade-offs, so those need thinking through as well. So in a nutshell, really, food technologies like cultured meat might have a role to play in feeding cities and other places like Sheffield, but there are still a lot of questions and uncertainties that need thinking through, and we need to make sure that if it does end up playing a role, it doesn't just reinforce all of the problems that we currently face with food and farming today. Thank you.